Calendar of Crime was written by Ellery Queen in 1951. Okay, not really. Ellery Queen isn't real. It was written by Manfred B. Lee and Frederick Dene. They are the authors of the Ellery Queen stories, but Ellery Queen is the detective. It's funny to think of him as the guy who writes his own mysteries, because some of these mysteries are ones where he doesn't look so great. Sorry, let me back up. Ellery Queen's Calendar of Crime is a short story collection, 12 different short stories. We've got a story for every single month of the year, and each story is generally based around a month or a holiday. So we've got New Year's Day. February, we've got a George Washington mystery for George Washington's birthday. March is Tax Day. Some of them don't quite work. So, for example, June, that's a wedding mystery. It didn't have to take place in June, but there is a phrase called June Bride, so it kind of fits. They also mention Juno a lot, well, in the opening part. So when you read 12 Ellery Queen stories back to back to back to back to back, you kind of get a sense for the formula, which is that the first page or two is a long lecture which kind of relates to the story and kind of doesn't. It's mostly like the author's trying to be clever and funny. And then sometimes, like in the last story, wow, their introduction section goes on and on forever and ever, and I think it was just done to fill up a bunch of pages. Another thing to the Ellery Queen formula is at the end of every mystery, he tries to give a big speech where he goes through the crime step by step by step from start to finish, and he comes to a solution, but then he gives a big plot twist or a surprise which changes the solution. So, he'll explain, oh, here's how the crime went. The culprit is clearly person A. And then, like, on the very last page, he's like, whoa, wait, you're forgetting piece of evidence B, which means the culprit is actually person C. Aha. And then the story ends there, which works. I like having a cool plot twist at the end of every story. But sometimes, if you're not on board with the plot twist, you're like, wait, what? I don't get it. And the story doesn't continue after that point, so you can't get more of an explanation if you really want one. So I'm generally a sucker for stories like these, collections like these, where themed collections are just great. We've got, it's a holiday themed collection, and it works for the most part. Sometimes you get a few stories which don't quite fit. I mean, I already explained June. Let's see. August is nothing, probably because there aren't any holidays in August. So that could have taken place anytime during the year. Again, September, I guess they couldn't think of a good holiday for September, so they just went with school opens again. So it's a generic school story. Similarly, the first story, the January story, that's just a generic school story. It didn't have to take place in January. But the rest of them are all pretty good, and they match the theme quite well. So the stories were written from 1946 to 1951. I guess at some point somebody realized, hey, we've got 5 or so holiday mysteries. Why don't we just write a holiday collection? And so the authors took a bunch of their old radio shows and turned them into stories. And like I said, most of them fit the collection. Some of them feel like they were definitely just written for this collection because they are recycled radio material. Now, I'm told some of the Ellery Queen fans are big fans of this book because it kind of blends the different eras of Ellery Queen. So it's mixture of the radio era and then the later on Ellery Queen era with his secretary, Nikki Porter. She features in pretty much all of these stories. And you know what? That's actually a good enough idea on its own. It's like, well, now that Ellery has a secretary, he's got this sidekick character who's with him all the time. Let's just rewrite our old radio shows to star her. That's a good idea. So I pretty much like this. I'll give this collection an 8 out of 10. I feel like a third of the stories were off. Let's say a 7.5 out of 10, actually, because like a third of the stories had problems. And I've just mentioned the problem. Some of the stories don't really fit the collection. They were kind of forced. And then some of the stories had twist endings, which I didn't really like. I think the ones that I'll point out, the October one, The Dead Cat, that story wasn't so good. It's an impossible crime mystery. It's like, oh no, it's impossible for the culprit to have gone through this room in the dark. The solution is that the culprit just was very careful when they were walking through the room. It's like, oh, really? That's the big mystery twist? That's not a good plot twist. The April mystery was excellent. I liked that one. Had a couple of mysteries which relied on specialized information. Like the January mystery, like I said, it's sort of a college mystery. It requires you to know the names of colleges. And the pirate mystery for August, that requires you to know dates about platinum. Yeah, so the big plot twists is that the pirate treasure is a fake, which you would know if you're familiar with platinum, because platinum wasn't used as a jewelry setting until the 1900s. I didn't know that information. How am I supposed to know that? I don't know. And I think the 3 R's was also a mystery that I didn't like. The September one, it was okay. I feel like the framing, the frame that it's a September mystery and it's reading, writing, and arithmetic at school, I feel like that was the worst part of the story. Also, a lot of these stories, well, not a lot of them, but a handful of them really didn't need to be murder mystery stories. It's all murder. It's all murder in these stories. But some of them were okay by themselves. We had finding treasure and stopping drug dealers, and I thought those were good enough mysteries. You didn't need to add a murder on top of it. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, probably a third of the stories don't have murder. February, March, December, those are not murder stories. The rest of them are, unless I'm mistaken. You can judge for yourself. After this point in the video, I'm just going to give my reviews for all the stories, because I reviewed each and every story separately. So everything up until now has just been my general thoughts on the collection. It's pretty good. I'd give it a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Like I said, about a third of them seem to have problems, but for the most part, I gave most of these stories a thumbs up. There were 3 or 4 which I either gave a sideways thumbs up or a thumbs down to. So because I liked 75% of the collection, I'm giving it a 7.5 out of 10. Now here's my review for each individual story in order. This short story is about Eastern University's Class of 13. Not Class of 6 or 79. I'll admit I was confused a little when I first read this, like 13? But then I realized they're talking about 1913, not 2013. It's an old story. Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review. 5 of the graduates made a secret group called the Inner Circle. The last person alive gets $200,000. 3 of them died this year. Bill Updike is worried they were killed, so he asks Ellery Queen to investigate. Assuming Bill's innocent, there's only one suspect. Bill refuses to say his name, because that would make the mystery too easy to solve. Bill is murdered the next day. The culprit purposely caused a fatal car crash by moving a warning sign off of the road. Ellery Queen finds 2 holes in a tree, which proves that's what happened. There are only 3 graduates left alive. One of them must be the killer. Ellery and his friends confront the graduates to no avail. Bill's widow remembers the names of the Inner Circle members all have one thing in common. This is a good challenge because we have the names of all the Inner Circle members and the names of all 3 graduates. Can you figure out what their names have in common and identify which graduate fits the pattern? The solution is that they all have colleges in their names, like Brown, Stanford, and William and Mary. The William and Mary one is a bit of a trick because it's Bill and his wife. That means the culprit is Temple, who admits his guilt by committing suicide. The end. Post-story follow-up. This was written in January 1947. It's January-themed, since the graduates have the Roman god Janus as their symbol, and they meet on January. January 1st, every year. 3 graduates died from natural causes this year. They're in their mid-50s. I would have pushed it back another decade to make the premise a bit more believable. I'm told this story is the introduction of Ellery Queen's secretary, Nikki. She's long-suffering because she really wants to go to a New Year's Eve party, only her boss is getting wrapped up in a murder investigation, as usual. I liked Nikki. This was a good introduction to her character. She overshadows the other members of the group, who are Sergeant Belly and Ellery's father. Overall, I thought it was a good story, even if it mostly boils down to a word puzzle that I never would have solved on my own. The secret college group worked, and the twist of Bill's unexpected murder was well done. I give The Adventure of the Inner Circle a thumbs up. This is a February mystery centered around George Washington's birthday. It was published in 1947. The alternate title is The President's Coin. That's a better title. I wouldn't have guessed that the coin is pronounced half-deem. Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review. Ellery is writing a mystery novel, which confused me a bit because I know he didn't really write the mystery stories about himself. His writing is interrupted by 3 unexpected guests. They're all antique collectors, and they got an urgent telegram ordering them to come here. A beautiful woman named Martha Clark arrives. She apologizes for tricking them all, but she needs their expertise on George Washington. In 1791, President George Washington was forced to stay at the Clark farm while his wife was sick. He was so grateful to the Clarks that he planted several oak trees behind their barn. Underneath one tree, he buried a ceremonial sword and a half-deem coin. Our mystery is figuring out where the coin is. Everyone goes to the farm. There are 12 trees planted in a perfect triangle. The Clarks have dug up all the trees, but they found nothing. The characters think up various solutions, like maybe there's another barn, or maybe the treasure is inside a stump. Ellery cuts every stump to splinters, but all that does is hurt his hands. Ellery becomes obsessed with getting inside George Washington's mind. He stays up late every night, pondering over Washington's love of numbers and the various times that Washington counted or measured things. The other people worry he's gone crazy. Ellery solves the case when he remembers the Founding Fathers were pretty obsessed with the number 13. George Washington wouldn't have stopped at just 12 trees. He would have planted 13. The 13th tree was in the middle of the triangle. It died and was replaced with a cherry tree. Ellery is aware of the irony of destroying a cherry tree on Washington's birthday. The end. Post-book follow-up. I suppose this is the second mystery with Ellery's secretary Nikki, since it was published a month after the first one. I liked her better in the first story. Here, she spent most of her time getting angry because Ellery's paying attention to a beautiful woman. Jealousy is not a good look on her. I liked the start of the story, where the 3 experts showed up and everybody wonders what's going on. They leave halfway through without any fanfare. The latter part of the story is several one-page scenes, which are mostly Ellery thinking by himself. The mystery solution's okay. It's hard to imagine a different solution, because the mystery doesn't have much to build on. It's a bunch of trees and general facts about the man who planted them. It's definitely not a traditional mystery, as there are no suspects or crimes, but I thought it was good enough. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the President's Half-Deem, a thumbs up. This short story has 3 names. That's good, because I don't like The Adventure of the Ides of Michael Magoon. I think that's too long and clunky. The other titles are Filled In for Murder and The Income Tax Robbery. Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review. Mike Magoon is an aging private detective. Somebody switched his tax documents with a newspaper last night. The tax deadline is tomorrow, so he's got to get them back right away. Mike's pretty sure when the switch happened. He left his office alone for 5 minutes when he put out a fire next door. He means that literally. Mrs. Carson's trash can was on fire. Ellery suspects Mrs. Carson set the fire on purpose as a distraction. He goes to question her, only to find she's been murdered. The suspects are the other two people who worked in the office. Ellery realizes the documents were stolen for blackmail purposes. Mike confesses his main client is the fabulously wealthy Mrs. Clementa Van Swicken Van Dome. That's quite a name. Her daughter likes to steal things. Mike is paid to follow the daughter around on shopping trips and hush up any incidents that arise. Mrs. Clementa gets a blackmail letter from the culprit. Ellery tries staking out the drop-off location, but it doesn't work. The culprit never appears. Both suspects were at the police station during the drop-off time, which is a pretty solid alibi. Ellery solves the mystery when he looks at Mike's briefcase for the first time. The newspaper that the culprit put inside the briefcase? It has the wrong date. It's impossible for somebody to commit a crime on the 13th using a newspaper from the 14th. That means Mike faked the theft to give himself plausible deniability. His original plan was only to commit blackmail, but he was forced to kill Mrs. Carson when she figured out his scheme and confronted him. The end. Post-story follow-up. The story was first published in March 1947. It is based on a radio show from March 1942. That's because in the 1940s, tax day was in March. This is the March story in the Calendar of Crime book. 4 years after the book was published, tax day was changed to April, which is unfortunate timing for the publishers. They kept it as the March story in later printings, probably because it would have been too much work to swap the March and April stories. Part of the April story takes place in March, so that it might have worked to swap them, but a minor rewrite would be necessary. It's easier to just leave this as a March story. One of the suspects is an artist named Leonardo Vinci, which is a play off of the famous artist Leonardo da Vinci. It made me happy to see I'm not the only author who has used weak placeholder names for characters like that. There's a pretty funny double joke where Ellery complains the culprit's plan is dumb. Inspector Queen says, criminals are always dumb. They're only smart in detective stories. And Ellery comments, if this was a story, Mike would be the culprit because that would be the most interesting plot twist. And what do you know, that's the ending. Overall, I like the story. I would complain the solution's a bit unfair. Readers couldn't have figured out the trick that the newspaper's a fake, because we were never told the newspaper's date. I'm not sure how that information could have been worked into the story, though, since Ellery instantly picks up on the solution when he sees the newspaper dates. And I kind of like how he instantly solves the case once he finds the clue. It's not that he sees the clue and doesn't realize the importance until later. No, he's a smart guy who figures it out right away. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Ides of Michael Magoon, a thumbs up. This story was great. I'm not sure my recap can do it justice. Part of why it's great is because it's a scary, creepy story. It takes place during a lightning storm, and everyone in the house is insane. It's almost like an Edgar Allan Poe mystery. Argo Fump Book Review, Argo Fump Book Review. On the last day of March, Inspector Queen goes to visit the Haggard children. He knew their parents. He was the best man at their wedding 40 years ago. Inspector Queen brings Ellery and Nikki along. I'm still not sure why Nikki is there. She is Ellery's secretary, but he's visiting family friends against his will. Why does he need his secretary there? The Haggard children are Mark, Tracy, and Malvina. On the car ride, Mark tells the horror story of a man who was murdered 10 years ago. The three suspects work together to cover up the crime. It's slowly revealed it's the true story of how the Haggard children killed their own father. Mark is wild and violent, while Malvina has uncontrollable screaming fits. Tracy arrives after midnight. He appears to be the only sane one in the family. He agrees to let Ellery inspect the study where the father was murdered. There are 2 guns. They're in racks 1 and 6 on either side of the door. The big clue is a pair of red dice belonging to Emperor Caligula. The children got it for their parents' ruby anniversary. The victim grabbed the dice while dying, so the dice are a clue to the killer's identity, only nobody's been able to figure it out. Ellery solves the case when he realizes the dice are loaded one of them always throws a 6. That means the murderer used the gun in rack 6. That's on the left. Only a left-handed person would casually grab a gun on their left, meaning Malvina is the culprit. This would have been a good mystery solution. All the clues are properly set up and things make sense. But after giving us a complete, satisfactory solution, the story moves on to give a different solution. I'm told this is something the full-length Ellery Queen books are known for. They do a good job with fake-out solutions, and I'd say this is definitely a good fake-out solution switch. Ellery points out that the ruby dice couldn't have been a wedding anniversary present because the ruby anniversary is the 40th. The father didn't live that long because he was killed 10 years ago. So the conclusion is that the father didn't die 10 years ago. He's still alive, and the entire trip is an incredibly complex April Fool's Day joke. The end. Post-story follow-up. This is April in the Calendar of Crime book. The April through August stories were all written in 1951, specifically for the book. The story was originally a radio show written 11 years earlier. It's such a good story, I'm surprised they didn't adapt it into a short story sooner. I don't have much to say besides it's a great story, it's scary and suspenseful, both mystery solutions are good, and the joke ending is really funny because it comes out of nowhere. My final score should not be a surprise to you if you've been paying attention to this review. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Emperor's Dice, a thumbs up. Ellery Queen and Nikki are exploring Civil War sites. Thanks to an unexpected rainstorm, they're forced to spend the night in Gettysburg. It's just as well we don't know what street they're on, because I would probably make a joke about the Gettysburg Address. Arglefumph Book Review, Arglefumph Book Review. Dr. Martin Strong is the mayor and chief of police here. He offers them a place to stay and a murder mystery. That's pretty much all a detective wants from life. Gettysburg has 3 Civil War veterans named Caleb Atwell, Zach Bigelow, and Abner Chase. Their last initials are ABC. And the original title of the story is as simple as ABC. It's tradition for the oldest veteran to blow the Gettysburg Bugle in the Memorial Day Parade. Last year, A died in the middle of the ceremony. Dr. Martin suspected foul play, but the family refused to investigate. Because A was in his late 90s, it's a miracle he didn't die sooner. There's a local legend which says the 3 soldiers hid a large treasure. The last one alive gets to keep it. Ellery laughs at how silly the idea is, which is weird because the last one alive gets the treasure was the premise of the first mystery of the book. That morning, C dies a natural death. His granddaughter is bitter about her future. She says the soldiers found the treasure during the war. It was in the cellar of a southern mansion. When B plays the bugle during the parade, he falls over dead. That's 2 men who died while playing the bugle. Clearly, the Gettysburg Bugle was poisoned. Before dying, B left behind a letter saying the treasure is inside A's coffin. Everyone opens it to find a treasure chest which contains a fortune in worthless Confederate dollars. So the rumors of the valuable treasure was all a joke that the soldiers kept going for decades. Ellery solves the mystery. A, B, and C wouldn't have killed for the treasure because they knew it was a joke. The killer must have either been B's descendant or C's descendant. Both of them were hoping to inherit the treasure. Since B was the last one alive, everyone assumes B's descendant did it. Ellery says no, it's C's descendant, because C would have been the last survivor if he hadn't died of natural causes earlier today. The end. Post-story follow-up. I didn't like the plot twist at the end. Ellery is assuming the poison was put on the bugle sometime before Memorial Day. I don't think he can safely make that assumption. There were multiple hours between C's death and B's death. It's possible the entire poisoning was planned and committed during that time. Ellery also seems to assume the poison was put on the bugle recently. I could swear I've read a similar mystery with the solution that the poison was intended for A last year. The killer only wanted to kill A. B's poisoning this year was an unfortunate accident because some poison remained left over in the bugle all year long. In Ellery's defense, the investigation isn't over. It is indicated there will be an autopsy and poison analysis to confirm his suspicions. And hey, maybe the culprit confessed, so there was no need to continue finding evidence. We're not told when the story happened, but it must have been in the late 1930s if we've got 3 people in their late 90s who were in their 20s in 1865. I'd say I like the story overall, but I did not like the twist at the end, which pinned all the blame on C's descendant. Instead of tying things up neatly, that just raised questions for me. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Gettysburg Bugle, a sideways thumbs up. The medical finger was originally called the June Bride. I don't know why they changed the name, because June Bride is a much better fit for a June story in a month-themed collection. Argofont Book Review, Argofont Book Review. Helen Troy is a beautiful young woman with many boyfriends. She left a trail of broken hearts behind her over the years. Her younger sister Euphemia is jealous. Euphemia has feelings for Henry Yates, one of Helen's better suitors. When Mrs. Troy dies, Helen starts to experiment with the wrong sort of boyfriend, namely Victor Luz. Victor is a vicious European. He was kicked off the boxing team for excessive violence. When Helen breaks up with Victor, he becomes obsessive. He follows her all the time, calls her, proposes suicide pacts. It's creepy. Victor scares Helen right into the arms of Henry Yates. Henry is happy. He was hoping that would happen when he first introduced Helen to Victor. Henry announces his engagement to Helen. Mr. Troy is the only one who's happy. Effie cries and runs away, while Victor threatens to murder Helen. Victor quickly changes his tune, and he's nothing but nice to them in the following weeks. He's so nice, they make him the best man. Mr. Troy is still worried for his daughter's life, so he hires Ellery Queen to protect her. Ellery and Sergeant Velly trail Victor extensively. They make sure he knows the police are watching him at every minute. During the wedding, Victor forgets the rings. He's forced to go back to the coat closet and get them out of his top coat. There was such a big fuss over the rings, I started to think, wouldn't it be a great twist if the wedding rings were poisoned? And that's exactly what happens! Helen dies during the wedding reception. The culprit swapped her wedding ring for one with a hidden needle. The needle's pressure activated. There's no way to determine who activated it, because dozens of people were fawning over the new bride and her ring. Inspector Queen wants to arrest Victor right away, but Ellery says he's being too hasty. Euphemia was seen fiddling around in the coat closet. It's possible she killed her sister because she loves the groom. It's also possible the groom is the killer, and he purposely set up Victor to take the blame. That would explain why he'd pick a violent best man. The next day, Ellery talks about the medical finger, which is an old English name for the ring finger. Oh, so that's where the name of the story comes from. Doctors thought that finger has a special nerve which connects directly to the heart, so they used it for certain medical purposes. Nikki complains this is very interesting, but totally irrelevant to the mystery solution. Ellery feels stupid when he realizes wedding rings are worn on the left hand. Only a left-handed handshake could have activated the poison needle and the ring, so the culprit's left-handed. Ellery calls his father, but it's too late. Inspector Queen already got a full confession out of Victor. Victor was dumb enough to leave behind a trail of evidence, which was easy for the police to follow. Inspector Queen pokes fun at Ellery for his outlandish theories that the culprit's someone other than the violent person who threatened the victim's life. So the big plot twist is that there is no plot twist. The end. Post-story follow-up. I thought Euphemia was going to be the culprit because she toes the line between prominent character and background character. Pretty much every time she's mentioned, she's having an emotional outburst. Ellery made a decent case for Henry being the culprit. Readers know about Henry's plot to scare Helen into accepting his proposal, so he is clearly a schemer when it comes to her. He could have been guilty too. Really, any of them could have been the culprit, and the story would have been fine. It was a good trick at the end when Ellery realized the culprit was left-handed, although the story acknowledges this is circumstantial evidence at best. Right-handed people are capable of committing left-handed crimes, especially when the crime is a handshake. Right-handed people can shake with their left hands. I give Ellery Queen, the medical finger, a thumbs up. Nikki visits her old friend Dorothy. Dorothy married the rich old Miles Center, but she's found herself in love with his younger brother David. I've noticed love triangles tend to be popular in murder mysteries. We had one in the previous. We actually had two of them in the previous story. Well, they're popular in murder mysteries because no matter who dies, there's automatically two different suspects with a good motive. Argo Funk Book Review. Argo Funk Book Review. Someone pushes a gargoyle off the roof, which almost kills Miles. Nikki is so terrified, she volunteers Ellery to solve the mystery. Ellery's pretty angry when he finds out because he is rushing to meet a book deadline. I always find it hilarious when Ellery is writing his own stories. Miles is pretty sure that Dorothy and David are trying to kill him. He asks Ellery to come examine the crime scene at midnight. Mr. Hart, the secretary, lets them into the mansion. They hear a gunshot upstairs and rush to find Miles covered with blood. I'm told this scene was pretty graphic at the time it was written. I think they got away with it because Miles isn't really dead. He's just wounded. As Ellery comments, head wounds tend to look worse than they really are. Ellery and Hart try to run after the killer. Ellery finds Dr. Grand, who's asleep next door, and he finds a boathouse with Dorothy hiding inside. She confesses she's the killer. The police arrive. Inspector Queen quickly proves Dorothy is lying. She lies twice, once about the size of the gun, and once about whether or not it's the type of gun that leaves bullet casings. Hart interrupts and says he's the killer, but Ellery quickly disproves that because Hart was with them when the gunshot was heard. I kinda liked how two different people give false confessions back to back. Now I want to see a story which is a series of fake confessions getting disproven. There's a somewhat odd scene where Nikki goes out into the garden, Ellery grabs her hand, and she thinks he's trying to romance her. Are they romantically involved? Ellery points out it's 3 a.m. in the middle of a terrible heat wave, and yet there is smoke coming out of David's chimney. I'm kind of surprised that the police searched the mansion for 3 hours, but nobody looked inside David's art studio. Ellery searches the fireplace. It has a half-burnt glove, which is covered with gunpowder. There are also confetti scraps. It's lucky for Ellery that the culprit did such a bad job of burning all the evidence. He's left to assume the culprit just threw the evidence towards the fire without sticking around to see if the evidence actually landed in the fire. Ellery has the mystery solved at this point, but he puts his explanation on hold for 8 hours so a police diver can arrive and find some evidence which is hidden at the bottom of a nearby river. That evidence being the murder weapon and David's corpse. By this point, most readers have probably forgotten David was supposed to be gone for the holiday. Ellery says the only holiday this month is the 4th of July. This deduction makes sense, but at the same time, this would never happen in real life. Everyone would know today is the 4th of July. Ellery wouldn't need to deduce it. The 4th of July is usually celebrated with fireworks, which explains the confetti that the culprit tried to destroy. Ellery concludes the gunshot they heard was actually the firework. The culprit used the firework to trick everybody into thinking the murder occurred at a later time. The only one who benefited from this deception was Hart, because it gave him an alibi, therefore he's the culprit. The end. Post-story follow-up. I forgot to mention, this story is called The Fallen Angel because the gargoyle that was pushed off the roof is called an angel by the victim. An angel of death, maybe. This was an okay story. It could have benefited from another draft, but it was certainly good enough for print. This is the second story in the collection where the mystery solution ties into the holiday, but the date is kept a secret from the reader so it can be a surprise. As I said, it was kind of silly. Inspector Queen complains about being forced to work outside his normal area. In real life, he would complain about being forced to work on a holiday, or being forced to work after midnight. Both of those complaints seem much more natural than his complaint that, ugh, you're forcing me to travel to a slightly different part of New York City? What is this? It occurs to me that we did not get an explanation for what Dorothy was doing in a random boathouse at midnight. Overall, I like the story enough. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Fallen Angel, a thumbs up. This is the last mystery which was written for the Calendar of Crime collection. I find it interesting that Ellery Queen already had murder mysteries ready to go for September through March, but he didn't have any for April to August. You'll notice this story has nothing to do with August. It could have happened at any time during the year. That's because it was originally an old radio story, which was rewritten to fit the collection. Argofunk Book Review, Argofunk Book Review. Eric Erikson owns Erikson's Island, which is just off of New York. In the year 1698, the famous pirate Captain Kidd took over the island for a week. Rumor has it he buried a fabulous treasure there. Ellery's excited at the chance to find old pirate treasure. Hey, he found George Washington's treasure in the February story, lost Civil War treasure in the May story. Why can't he find pirate treasure in August? Ellery's disappointed when he is hired as a bodyguard, not a treasure hunter. Eric's niece Inga was recently married to Anthony Hobbs Watkins. Anthony's father is Colonel Hobbs Watkins, and there's something off about the two men. They're a mixture of vaguely sinister and professionally British. The other suspect is the island caretaker, Long John. He's got a peg leg and always wants money. It's almost like they put a real-life pirate into this pirate mystery. Everyone goes to the island. Inga reveals there's more to the legend. Captain Kidd said, "You can find the treasure if you look through the eye of the needle in the tower room." Ellery explores the room, which is old and mostly empty. Ellery turns his attention to the marbled wallpaper. Marble has veins, and Ellery finds one that looks vaguely like a needle. When he pushes a broom through the eye of the needle, he gets a peephole that leads to the spot where the treasure is buried. It's under 4 feet of water right now. They'll have to wait until tomorrow to dig it up. But who can wait that long for pirate treasure? Ellery starts digging at 4:29 a.m. He finds a decayed treasure chest filled with gold and diamonds and platinum. That's when Eric Erikson is murdered. He was shot in the tower room, presumably by somebody who was using the peephole to watch Ellery dig up the treasure. The police arrive and search the area. They know the victim fired a gun because there's a casing on the ground, but the bullet's nowhere to be found. Ellery insists on searching the suspects, but none of them have bullet wounds. I solved half of the mystery at this point. That made me feel smart. The killer is Long John. He has no gunshot wound because he was shot in the peg leg. It's kind of surprising. Somebody searched his body for gunshot wounds, but they didn't notice a bullet hole in his wooden leg. I wasn't able to solve the second half of the mystery, which relies on specialized information I didn't know. The treasure has a diamond which has a platinum setting. That's impossible. Platinum wasn't used in Europe until the 1700s, and it wasn't used as a setting for diamonds until the 1900s. Therefore, this 1600s treasure is a fake. Ellery correctly assumes the Hobbs Watkinses are diamond thieves who set up the fake treasure discovery as a way to fence their stolen goods. Long John was in on the scheme, although he got impatient and killed the victim early. The end. Post-story follow-up. I feel bad for Inga. She had no idea her marriage was all an excuse to fence stolen goods. If she hadn't talked about the rumors of pirate treasure on her father's island, the culprits probably would have left her alone. This case was okay. I probably would have been satisfied with it if it hadn't turned into a murder mystery at the end. That felt a little tacked on. It's almost like Long John went rogue just so the story could feature a murder. I thought it was good enough that they discovered a marble peephole and the revelation that the treasure was a fake. Those were good enough mysteries. The story doesn't say how the culprits made the fake peephole, beyond saying Long John bored it into the wall. He pulled back the wallpaper in order to do this, correct? This is probably one of my least favorite stories in the collection so far. It's not outright bad. It just feels a little off, like it was rushed, and it wasn't written for its own sake, but for the sake of having an August-themed story in this collection. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Needle's Eye, a sideways thumbs up. The title page of Calendar of Crimes says this story takes place September 3rd, when the story itself says it's the 13th. Continuity? Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review. Ellery is invited to a really weird college. The methodical Professor Chip has gone missing. He was supposed to return to campus for the start of term 10 days ago, but nobody's heard from him. I'm sure his students are worried. We meet his fellow teachers, Dr. Barlow and Professor Bacon. Professor Chip spent the summer in his cabin working on a novel. He sent everyone a postcard on July 31st. Ellery examines the professor's room. Professor Chip has a complete set of Ellery Queen books. How flattering. Ellery is told they're the only books that Professor Chip purchased. Normally, he gets his books from a rental library. A rental library? This is a college. Surely they have an actual library on campus? Ellery notices one of his books is upside down. It's from the rental library. It was supposed to be returned on June 30th. This date, and a bloodstain on the floor, indicates he was killed here on June 30th. He never went to his cabin in July. The last person to see Chip before he left was a bookstore owner named Weems. Weems says Chip was writing a mystery novel called The Adventure of the Three R's. That title inspires Ellery to find clues based on reading, writing, and arithmetic. The reading clue is the upside-down book. The writing clue? That's the postcards dated July 31st. If you look closely, you'll see they were actually dated July 1st. The culprit wrote a 3 in the date to make it seem like the victim was alive in July, hiding the fact that the murder took place in June. The group visits the victim's cabin, which has his manuscript, his trunk, and his dead body. All that's left of him is a skeleton with dry bones. The narration says that it was Professor Chip's skeleton could not be questioned, which is a total lie. It's not his skeleton. As Ellery says at the end, Professor Chip has not been dead long enough to leave behind a skeleton. It's a fake. So I'm saying Ellery could solve the mystery here. Instead, he reads through Professor Chip's murder manuscript. Guess what? All the details of Professor Chip's murder match the manuscript. It's like he was writing about his own death. Since Chip's dead body is a fake, Ellery concludes he's still alive, and the entire mystery was a publicity hoax for Chip's new book. He wanted to brag his mystery was so good, it fooled Ellery Queen. The end. Post-story follow-up. I felt like Ellery was a little off in this story. I think he would normally notice the skeleton clue and the forged date clue immediately. I half noticed the skeleton clue. That is, I thought it was odd the bones were described as very dry, but the very next sentence assures readers it's the victim's real corpse, so I shrugged off my objection. Maybe Ellery was distracted by the mystery novel elements, which makes sense. He's a mystery novelist, so the mystery novel things threw him off. The arithmetic clue is the fact that the victim has a book worth a lot of money. That feels like the weakest of the 3R clues. Now, if the clue had been about addition or something, fine, that's arithmetic. But saying a book's price tag is a large number doesn't equate to using math. The title of the upside down book changes depending on which version of the story you're reading. When they reprinted the story for Calendar of Crime, they changed the book to Ellery's most recent novel, Origin of Evil. If you're gonna give yourself free advertising in your stories, you might as well make sure it's up to date. This isn't the first mystery in the collection where the entire mystery was a fake, done in order to trick Ellery. The other fake mystery story was far superior to this one. I don't think the 3R's angle worked. I suspect the story would have worked better without that as a framing device. I'm still kind of grumpy the narration lied about the skeleton clue, too. It's definitely my least favorite mystery of the book so far. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the 3R's, a thumbs down. This story is also called The Halloween Mystery and Eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses is a terrible title because the premise is that Ellery solves a murder mystery in a pitch black room. Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review. Nikki is invited to a fun Halloween party. The ghost host says you have to dress up in a black cat costume and go through a darkened room, and she uses tons of exclamation marks. Nikki likes it. Ellery hates it so much, he wishes he could be the murder victim in this story, so he could get out of the party early. The dark room has a bunch of random items scattered everywhere, so it's impossible to get across without smashing into a ton of things. Ellery grabs for Nikki's hand, but the thing he grabs is not a hand. Did Ellery slip a dirty joke into this story? Ellery hates the party and all the people there, who are Lucy Trent, Edith and Jerry Baxter, and Anne and John Crombie. They play a few party games before someone suggests playing Murder Mystery. Ellery has to roll his eyes at this because people always force him to play murder games at parties. He hates it. Nikki's setup for the murder game is more complicated than it needs to be. She forces everyone to stand silently in place in the dark while the killer goes through the kitchen door 4 times. It's almost like Nikki knows there will be a real murder here, and she's accommodating the killer by giving them as much time as possible. When the lights turn back on, they discover John has been killed for real. Edith is found unconscious in the closet of the dark room. Suspicion falls upon Edith because she was having an affair with the victim. Ellery knows who the killer is now, but it wouldn't be any fun if he told his dad who to arrest right away. No, he's got to put on a big scene where he goes through the entire murder step by step and explains everything. That's way more fun. Ellery forces everybody into reenacting the murder in the dark. He claims it's for the sake of the police, but it's really a trick. He's goading the impulsive killer into making a move against him, which is exactly what happens. Just as he's about to name the culprit, the killer proves her guilt by trying to attack him in the dark. The crucial clue is that the killer put Edith in the closet of the dark room. That's impossible. No one can cross the dark room without bumping into something. No one, that is, except Lucy Trent, who's the person who set up the room. The end. Post-story follow-up. I thought the mystery solution was kinda dumb. I read another review which thought the solution was extremely dumb. How did the culprit get through the impossible maze in the dark? They walked very carefully, that's how. And they did it while carrying an unconscious woman to boot. I agree, the culprit walked carefully is kind of a cheater solution. I would have preferred, unknown to the others, the culprit cleared a pathway ahead of time, then set the room back to the original state while she pretended to find Edith's body in the closet. That solution could have worked, and it would have been more satisfying than the solution of, just kidding, the impossible crime isn't impossible after all. The last paragraph reveals Lucy's the killer. I wish the story went on past that point because I wanted to hear more about her motive and preparation. Was the murder planned or was it a spur-of-the-moment decision? Either way, it's not a good idea to commit a murder based on the presence of a genius detective. You're likely to get caught. There is little effort put into the characters in this story. It's hard to tell them apart, especially when they're all talking about the victim's affair, because the story says Anne's sister in place of Lucy and Jerry's wife in place of Edith. So if you don't have them all figured out before then, well, you're just going to be lost. In the story's defense, it is appropriate for the characters to be hard to distinguish, because Ellery hates them all, and he doesn't care about them, and doesn't put any effort into getting to know them. In fact, he spends the first half of the story insulting them in his thoughts. Some of his insults were kind of sexist, which put me off, but Ellery's grumpiness was probably the highlight of the story. Everything else was kind of bad, which is a shame. Solving a murder mystery in the dark at a costumed Halloween party should have been a fun premise. I give Ellery Queen, The Adventure of the Dead Cat, a thumbs down. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Ellery gives a know-it-all lecture on how Thanksgiving is a bunch of lies made up by Americans to make themselves feel important. The real Thanksgiving feast was a 3-day event in October, where people ate eels, and the Indians were far more important than the Pilgrims. Ellery sounds like one of those holiday clickbait articles which come out every year. Everything you know about the first Thanksgiving is wrong. Those articles, you've seen them, right? Argle Funk Book Review, Argle Funk Book Review. Nikki is celebrating the holiday by giving food to the needy. Good for her. One of the needy people is part Indian. Ellery is interested in meeting an Indian for Thanksgiving, so he comes along. I suspect Ellery just wants an excuse to repeat his lecture on how Thanksgiving should be changed to a Native American holiday. That was very forward thinking on his part. There are plenty of people today who agree with that sentiment. The woman in question is Mother Carey. She recently moved, so they get her address from the French restaurant where she works. Ellery's excited to get French food for Thanksgiving. He asks for an expensive wine called Chateau de Quim. Guess what? The restaurant is secretly a front for a drug smuggling operation, and that wine name is their secret passcode. Isn't that an unbelievable coincidence? Because Ellery said the code word by accident, Pierre the waiter gives Ellery some drugs. Ellery's car fails because the story needs them to take a cab at this point. On the ride over to Mother Carey's, they discuss the drugs with the chatty cab driver. Ellery, you shouldn't talk about your illegal drugs right in front of strangers. I know your dad is a police inspector, but you should really be a lot more discreet. They give the food to Mother Carey. Ellery has a nice detective moment where he quickly counts the number of doors in her apartment and realizes she has a spare room hiding someone. That is her husband. He was framed for the drug dealing 3 years ago. By coincidence, he recently escaped from jail. There sure are a lot of coincidences in this story, huh? Inspector Queen is pretty mad at Sergeant Velli for wasting weeks looking for this escaped convict when Ellery was able to find him by total accident in under 5 minutes. Our heroes go to the restaurant where they find Pierre the waiter has just been murdered. Carrie the convict is there. Pierre's eyes show that he's been taking drugs, and it's revealed Clothild, the cashier, is stealing money from customers. They go back to the Carey house, where Ellery explains Pierre must be the go-between for the drug operation. He's clearly not the drug dealer, because he handed out drugs without receiving payment for them. The culprit killed Pierre in order to protect themselves. That means the culprit has to be the cab driver. Nobody else could have overheard Ellery's plan to call the police. That's the last big coincidence of the story. Ellery's car failed just so he would be forced to take a cab driven by the leader of the drug ring so he could overhear Ellery's plan to contact his policeman father. Ellery and Nikki struggle to remember anything about the cab driver other than the fact that he was really interested in their drugs. Really, that should have been a giveaway. Ellery remembers the cab driver touched a wine bottle. This telltale bottle has the culprit's fingerprints on it. The cab driver appears out of nowhere with a gun, saying he secretly followed them to see if they could solve the case. Ellery reveals he predicted this move. That's when Sergeant Velly appears out of nowhere with a gun and captures the culprit. Happy Thanksgiving, sucker. The end. Post-story follow-up. That makes 2 stories in a row where Ellery knows the culprit's identity, but he makes a big show of explaining who the culprit is just to lure the culprit out of hiding. It works better here than in The Adventure of the Dead Cat, written 1 month before this one. The Thanksgiving theme of the story is pretty good, although it would certainly be possible to rewrite the story without reference to the holiday. Inspector Queen was pretty good in this story. Even though he's got a cold, he's still pretty successful at his job. Especially compared to that previous story, where he was more of an idiot who jumps to wrong conclusions, only to be corrected by a weary Ellery. While this story was a quick-paced adventure where Ellery stops drug dealers, I don't think it's much of a mystery. It's more of an adventure story. I figured out the culprit was the cab dealer right away, and as I pointed out, the story hinges on 3 big coincidences. Ellery says the password for drugs at a drug den without knowing the password or knowing it's a drug den. He takes the culprit's cab without knowing it when his car dies unexpectedly. Nikki just happens to visit Mrs. Carey shortly after her husband escaped prison. I liked the story, but I feel like it should be docked a few points for these coincidences which drive the whole plot. I give Ellery Queen the Telltale Bottle a sideways thumbs up. The Adventure of the Dauphin's Doll is a Christmas mystery by Ellery Queen, first written in 1948. As far as I can tell, the hardcore detective and mystery fans don't like this story. I thought it was okay. It's more of a light-hearted joke story than a serious mystery. Not only are there jokes about how terrible Christmas shopping is, and references to various Christmas carols, there are some long sections with different formatting. Like, one is done as a theater script, one is done like a legal brief. It gave me the sense that the author was playing around, not taking things too seriously with this mystery. The author's playing around doesn't always work. The first 5 pages is the author giving us the rather cruel biography of a man and his daughter. The story goes on and on about these characters, who I thought were unpleasant, and guess what? They're dead. They have nothing to do with the story. We don't need to hear about how this man made fun of his wife for saying perfectly reasonable things. If I was the editor, I would have cut out this entire section. But I'm guessing Ellery Queen was the editor of Ellery Queen magazine, so he got to write whatever he pleased. For Christmas Eve this year, a department store is going to display a doll collection. One doll has a fabulously wealthy gem. Mr. Bondling, the lawyer in charge of the collection, just got a message from the villainous master thief, Comus. Comus likes to taunt the police by warning them when and where he's going to strike. He calls Ellery Queen just to taunt him. He also causes a scene with a fake Santa Claus when the diamond's being moved. He leaves behind a note, which basically reads, "Haha, you just did exactly what I thought you'd do." I liked Comus. I thought he made for a good villain. It's implied that he and Ellery have gone up against each other in the past, many times. Too bad he doesn't appear in any other stories. At its heart, this is a locked room mystery. The mystery is how the culprit stole the diamond. It's inside a locked glass case on a platform. Armed police officers are watching it for hours. There are 3 incidents that day. An old man tries to open the case. Santa Claus takes a 5-minute bathroom break. It turns into a 2-hour lunch break. A man steals a woman's purse, causing a big commotion. At the end of the day, the lawyer declares the jewel has been replaced with a fake. Ellery immediately suspects the Santa Claus was swapped with an imposter, but when they track him down, he's the real deal. So how did Comus steal the gem? The story reviews all of the events and explains how this was an impossible crime. This is another point of contention for the hardcore mystery fans. They didn't like how elaborate the scenario was. They argued the diamond was too well protected to allow for any interesting solutions. I mentioned the 3 incidents. Those are all red herrings. Nobody touched the diamond during any of those incidents. The only time someone touched the diamond is when the lawyer declared the jewel was swapped with a fake. That's when the swap occurred. The lawyer did it. He's the culprit. I thought that was an okay solution. I also would have accepted the solution of the diamond wasn't swapped. The lawyer lied about it for some reason. But I guess if you're a mystery fan who has read hundreds of impossible crime and locked room mysteries, this particular mystery solution seems trite. So the story's not the greatest. It kind of paints itself into a corner with the solution, and there's plenty of material which could be cut. I'm willing to give the story a pass on its flaws, because I found it to be more of a joke, light-hearted Christmas story. I wish Comus had returned for a serious, full-length mystery. It seems a shame to waste such an interesting villain on this story. I give Ellery Queen's The Adventure of the Dolphin Stall a sideways thumbs up.